And the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine is growing by the day. As Russian forces intensify their attacks, civilians are desperately and urgently trying to leave the country. For more on this and to discuss Canada's response, we welcome back to CP24 Tonight former Foreign Affairs Minister Peter McKay, who served under Stephen Harper. Thanks so much for making time. Mr. McKay, a third round of talks between Russia and Ukraine wrapping today, with Moscow now announcing a temporary ceasefire. But we know previous attempts have collapsed. Do you think this one will work?
Well, one would hope, and hope is not a plan. And we have seen, as you've said, a bit of deception and effort to cause a distraction and then move troops or have further artillery attacks. And so it's very difficult to take Vladimir Putin, his senior ministers and representatives at their word. And Ukrainians are fighting hard, fighting for their lives. And I think President Zelensky and the reaction of the brave Ukrainian people will not fall into the belief that they should take the Russians at their word. And I think that they've been burned before, and they have to participate in these talks, but they have to proceed as if this is more deception.
So let's talk about response and reaction. This weekend, NATO repeatedly rejecting calls to declare that no-fly zone over Ukraine. In your opinion, is that the right move here?
It's a very difficult situation that NATO and the West finds itself in, because outwardly, Putin again has said that any confrontation, any direct involvement by NATO troops will result in retaliation and potential nuclear retaliation. And so that is what is on the minds of everyone around that negotiating table in Brussels. However, one of the more, I think, innovative discussions that we have seen recently is the United States plan to have the Polish Air Force provide its planes to the Ukrainians, which are Russian planes, incidentally. They're MiG-49s, and they would then replace those planes in the Polish Air Force. The Americans, they would give them new F-16 fighter planes. And so that would up the ability to control some of the airspace above the battle space in Ukraine. That's what they need most right now, UAVs and the ability to provide some protection on the ground from incoming Russian artillery and bombers.
You mentioned the threat of a nuclear war. Are you concerned about this? How realistic could that be?
Well, we're dealing with an individual who is clearly quite unhinged, angry, feeling cornered. Things have not gone as Mr. Putin would have liked. The Russian forces now are essentially bogged down. They haven't gained the advantage that they thought would come to them quickly. And that is, of course, almost entirely attributable to the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian reserves, the civilian population, yes, the support from the West, but they have fought ferociously and with great valor. They have far outdone themselves and certainly well beyond the expectations of what Russia thought they would encounter. And keep in mind, the Russian troops that are there, many of them are literally and figuratively operating in the dark. They were not given clear instructions. They didn't know what they were in for. And I believe that they're very demoralized, in addition to having run into real supply chain challenges in terms of food and fuel. And so the relentless efforts of the Ukrainian military and the resistance have had a devastating effect, some estimating up to 11,000 Russian soldiers, significant losses, helicopters, aircraft, tanks, artillery. The Russians have been staggered by what they've encountered since they crossed into Ukraine.
Do you think Putin did not expect Ukrainians to fight back this hard?
Well, I think he was overconfident. I think he's a megalomaniac and a sociopath and believes in his own rhetoric. That is also an interesting point to register, in that the Russian people, I think, are starting to get a clearer picture of what is actually happening on the ground, the unjustified and illegal war that they have been engaged in. And of course, the crackdown on the media in Russia, the efforts to turn off the internet and punish any reporting coming out of Russia. This is all an indication, again, that Vladimir Putin is in over his head in some ways for what he anticipated. So the turn began almost immediately after the initial attack, and it's gotten worse. But that makes him perhaps all the more dangerous, that he's lashing out, that he is acting in a very irrational way. And so it is incumbent upon the West to continue with the sanctions that you led off with, the discussion around how we curb the export of oil, because that is the major source for the funding of the Russian army. It's in fact 40% of their GDP, 60% of their exports is Russian oil and gas. So squeezing that off, hitting their banks, hitting their oligarchs, the people closest to Putin, and reminding his generals that they may be the ones that wind up in the dock in The Hague for war crimes, in addition to Vladimir Putin, if his own people don't do something about it first.
Yeah, a lot of discussion today about the international reliance on Russian oil. Could we see a global boycott of Russian oil?
Well, hard to suggest it'll be a global boycott, because some believe that China will pick up the excess oil, other countries that are aligned with Russia. But certainly from a Western perspective, with the United States leading the way, it looks like it's headed in that direction. And that will have catastrophic impacts for the Russian economy, along with the other Western companies that are pulling out, including my own, Deloitte, and others, who are removing their personnel, their companies, their ties to Russia. That is flattening the Russian economy. It's having a very real impact, which, while it will hit the average Russian citizen, that puts pressure on the Russian regime. And again, an unintended, unexpected consequence for Vladimir Putin that, believe it or not, he is heading into an election year 2 years from now, although he has been in power now over 20 years and changed his own constitution so that he can stay there for another undetermined length of time.
I want to ask more about those sanctions. Canada announcing more today against some current and former Russian leaders, but still absent from that list is Putin confidant Roman Abramovich, who we know has Canadian business holdings. Are these economic sanctions hard enough? Are they hitting Putin where it really hurts?
I believe they are. There's always a delayed reaction, but the hits on individuals close to him, the oligarchs, those who are in his inner circle, are certainly going to cause them to pressure Vladimir Putin if he is, in fact, a person at this stage who can be influenced. And yes, it is having the desired effect, although keep in mind this war is now 12 years old, 12 days old, and we are, of course, seeing a horrible humanitarian impact on the people of Ukraine. So these sanctions can't happen soon enough and can't be harsh enough. And we need to continue all of these efforts on all fronts. But what they need now, most of all, is military equipment and support and the ability to defend to the best of their ability against these Russian artillery attacks. That, to me, the longer that we can delay Russia from gaining ground, and keep in mind as well that gaining ground and holding ground inside Ukraine are entirely different. And it will be, I think, clear that this is going to be, if the Russians are to stay, like other conflicts that became protracted, like Vietnam and others, where they are going to fight tooth and nail inside Ukraine against that Russian aggression. And
you mentioned military aid. We know lethal aid now on the way to Ukraine. The Prime Minister in Europe today making that announcement, having those meetings. What's your assessment of Trudeau's handling of this crisis so far?
Well, I think he's tried to stay in step, most notably with European countries. He's in the UK right now, as you noted. I think we are trying to calibrate a united front and appear as a united front. I think Mr. Putin is probably quite surprised that the West has coalesced, that NATO has been strengthened, that the mission to respond in very real and quite frankly, substantial ways has gone well beyond what he expected. And this has solidified the resolve of the Ukrainian people. And we need to keep reminding ourselves that they need to feel that the West and that the world is with them, is on their side, and that further help is on the way. And with the NATO countries that are on their border, we ourselves must be reminded that if Russia is able to roll over Ukraine, the question may well be, are we fighting them in Ukraine in a united way, or are we waiting for them to come across that line, that NATO line, and then we're all in by virtue of Article 5? And so It's a very delicate balance that has to be struck. It's a day-by-day military, diplomatic, political assessment, and you can be sure that people are up late in all of the capitals, very much relying on information, open source and otherwise, to make those calculations and to map out what happens next.
Lots to follow on this story. We so appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Former Foreign Affairs Minister Peter McKay, thanks again.